I opened the door and there was my boss sitting with one of my best friends. What do we do when somebody abandons or betrays us? You know, every one of us is involved in a relationship of some kind. We have relationships with our spouse or our significant other. We also have people that we have to work with, people that we see day to day. And what do we do when a relationship goes south? What do we do when we are betrayed or abandoned by someone? Welcome back to the Outdoor Catholic. You know, a relationship is a lot like a rose bush. A rose bush needs water, sunlight, tender loving care and nurturing. And our relationships do as well. And what do we do when a relationship goes south? Somebody abandons or betrays us. Sometimes when we experience this betrayal and abandonment and we don't practice forgiveness, we can often carry this guilt, shame, and embarrassment for years. You know, Jesus was dining with the tax collectors and the sinners, and all the townspeople would approach Jesus and say, "Why are you dining with these sinful people?" And how did Jesus reply? Jesus replied, "I did not come to call the righteousness, but the sinners to repentance." And that is what Jesus is saying to us today. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us by saying, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." And he's talking to all of us about the Father's mercy, his love, kindness, and he wants us to forgive others, and that's not always easy to do. I remember a few years ago when I was at work and I went to knock on my boss's door one morning, and of course I didn't wait for an answer. I barged right in. I opened the door and there was my boss sitting with one of my best friends, Doug, and immediately I apologized. I said, "I'm sorry." I closed the door. But about a half hour later, when I was back at my desk, Doug came up to me and says, "What the heck are you doing disturbing me in my meeting?" And I apologized. But for 2 to 3 weeks, he would not talk to me. That must have been a very important meeting, and I realized I overstepped my bounds. But again, Doug was holding this grudge. This went on for several weeks, and he eventually did forgive me, but I felt terrible about that during that time period, and our relationship became very strained, and it was really hard to move forward until he finally said, "Hey, I forgive you. I was having a bad day. Things weren't going quite the way I wanted." In Luke chapter 6, Jesus said, "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." And I think often about God's love for us and how he wants us to ask for mercy and forgiveness when we offend him or when we offend our neighbor. The Catholic Church asks us to go to confession about once a year, and I know that's hard to do for a lot of us. I have missed many occasions over my lifetime, but in the last few years I do manage to make it to confession, and I can tell you what a privilege it is to be able to sit down with a priest and openly talk about my wrongdoings or where I've offended someone. If you have guilt building up about something that's happened in your life and you want to get it off your conscience, it's a great idea to sit down with a priest about once a year. And what a relief it is to feel God's grace come back into your life when you sit down and talk about your shortcomings, things you may have done wrong. It could be as simple as an impure thought. But once you leave that church and do penance, then you feel so much better. You feel like you can go back out into the world with a clear conscience and restore your relationship with others as well as God. So this past year, I had the privilege of attending a penance service. And this was something that our church had announced in the bulletin. And it was on a Tuesday in December. And I had this on the calendar for several weeks to go to this. And it really gave me some time to think about what sins I may have committed, or what was on my mind and my conscience that I needed to talk to God about. And I really enjoyed this 4-week process of thinking about these things. And when that Tuesday night came around, and as I drove all the way to church, I thought, what a privilege it is to be able to go and confess my sins. And it was nothing major. It was something that was on my mind for quite some time. I had some envy towards somebody, and it was turning into a jealousy, and I knew it wasn't right. But when I sat down and shared this with the priest, I had basically cleared this off my mind, and the grace that came upon me, I mean, I felt so happy afterwards. Normally when I go to confession, I get a little emotional, and this was pure joy, because I knew that God's grace had come back into my life, and I no longer felt this envy, this resentment or jealousy toward this person anymore. You know, there was a John Hopkins study done a few years ago, and it said that chronic anger and resentment from unforgiveness leads to higher stress and cardiovascular strain. And people who hold on to grudges for a long time tend to experience more anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress symptoms. If you liked that video, make sure to check out the Scott Campbell Outdoor Catholic YouTube channel, where we have more videos just like this. And if you want to see our newest videos, make sure to click subscribe so you'll get notifications.